session of this morning, and we will start with Susanne Popp, coordinator of European Project 10, Eurovision, from University of Augsburg, Germany. Please.
Dear Mr. Director of this very well-known museum, dear President of ICOM of the world, dear President of ICOM of Portugal, and dear Mr. Raposo, Director of the Research Department of this museum, and dear Mario, Director of the Communication of this museum, and dear ladies and gentlemen of ICOM in Portugal. I feel deeply honored to be speaking to you here today. Therefore, I would like to express my sincerest thanks to everyone from ICOM Portugal to give me, being the coordinator of the European Union's project EMEE, the opportunity to present the central ideas of this project to this high-ranking circle of experts, and I am curious what your debate will be about that. The core of my lecture is the EMEE Project's Eurovision. This means our vision of the development of cultural heritage in Europe of the 21st century, in particular as far as history museums, this is our main topic, are concerned. The project is developing and testing these ideas, and doing so, we aim for our publication and networks, for the workshops and study modules we develop, to give fresh and attractive impetus for a wide range of local, regional, and other national history museums in Europe. First of all, I would like to quickly introduce the partners of the EMEE Project, which runs over 4 years and is supported by the European Union's Programme for Culture. It will conclude in autumn 2016 this year, and this means we are currently going through the final stage of the work. This stage is characterized by the so-called Eurovision labs, whose purpose is to bring together the results of all the previous stages and to test them in practical contexts. The National Museum of Arqueology here in Lisbon, our distinguished EMEE partner, has been so kind not only to invite us to attend here our 5th general meeting, but also to present the Eurovision lab to us. Today's opening evening of the Portuguese Eurovision lab is part of this work. Regarding the EMEE partners, we have put emphasis regarding the EMEE consortium, we have put emphasis on the highest possible level of internationality and interdisciplinarity because it is our intention to maximize the exchange of perspectives. At the very heart of this partnership, we find 3 very different national museums. First, this museum on site. Second, the Bulgarian National Historical Museum in Sofia, which covers a bright time span from the Neolithic to the present. And finally, quite different, a National Museum of Slovenia for Contemporary History, located in Ljubljana. As far as European history is concerned in these 3 museums, their background is very different. Apart from these 3 museums, we have partnering universities, which all have different areas of focus and expertise. To begin with, expertise with regard to museum education is represented by Emma Navi from Roma University. Emma Navi is the chairperson of the International Committee for Education and Cultural Action, which is a widely acclaimed institution within the International ICOM organization. Moreover, there is the expert team on aesthetic, cultural, and creative approaches to the cultural heritage. This branch is represented by our French team from the University Paris Est Créteil, which is focusing on this field of work. There is a team of University of Augsburg, where I come from, whose research revolves around the conveyance of history in education and in the public sphere, and that specializes in the role of cultural heritage in the 21st century. Last but not least, an avant-garde group of artists called Monochrome from Vienna, who operates on an international level, are also part of the EMEE consortium, as well as the internationally renowned expert on scenography, namely the Atelier Brückner from Stuttgart. In the following outline, I have decided not to include any explanations of the project structure. This is because all information can easily be accessed via the project's homepage. Here you see the front page of our website, and the other we also are in phase. Thanks to Mario, we have a strong Facebook communication. Instead, I would like to focus on the central idea of the project, which is the question of the so-called Europeanization of the cultural heritage in Europe and the potential contribution history museums can make in this regard. In particular, I would like to introduce you to our Eurovision. This means our vision of the European development of museums. I think we all agree that, if we like or not, that the EU's process of supranational integration and also an increasingly multicultural population in Europe structurally changed the historical context for the public presentation of the local, regional and national cultural heritage in Europe. Hans-Martin Hinz has just talked about this topic. Museums, being public and often state institutions, always communicate more than just the objects and the exhibitions they display. The way in which museums select topics and objects, and the ways in which they organize an exhibition and shape their relations to the visitors, this all informs us directly or indirectly about their professional self-conception, about their conception of their role in the society, their ideas about their relation to the visitors, and last but not least, about the position with regard to their attitude to the new European context of the cultural heritage they preserve. It does not matter whether a museum in question ignores the changed European context or actively integrates it. The museum conveys its position very clearly either way. Further, we all agree, if we like or not again, that Europe's impact on the local, regional and national cultural heritage is, at the moment, since several years, very high on the agenda, and this applies to museological discourses as well as to museum development in Europe. Let me illustrate this with a few examples. There are a range of newly founded institutions featuring an explicit European orientation, like it does the Museum Europäischer Kulturen, Museums of European Cultures in Berlin, which deals with the life works throughout Europe from the 18th century to the present, with an emphasis on cross-European cultural contact. Another type is the Musée des Civilisations de l'Europe et de la Méditerranée in Marseille, opened in 2013, which focuses on the Mediterranean region, which is why also non-European countries bordering on the Mediterranean Sea are included. The presentation of the topics reaches from the Neolithic to the present. And finally, in autumn 2016, we think at least, the House of European History shall be opened in Brussels, which has a quite different focus. It wants to focus primarily the 20th century, paying particular attention to the European unification process. Initiator of this museum is the European Parliament, and this makes the underlying political intention apparent, which is to develop a European identity concept by the means of your museum project. Very likely, this museum will present a European master narrative to its visitors, more or less analogous to the concept of national museums in the 19th century, which were asked to work as identity fabrics. And I don't think that this is the way to go into the European future of cultural heritage. In a quite different direction go other museums that are dedicated to cross-European or intercontinental migration movements or other transnational phenomena. They stress the idea that the European nation-states and the European identity never have been closed and stable entities, but on the contrary, that their history and identity is profoundly shaped by continuous and persistent flows of migrations and of cultural exchanges, adoptions, and transformations. And finally, also the EU itself has developed political strategies regarding the cultural heritage and supported it by use of financial engineering instruments like the Culture Program, which supports the EMEE Project. In accordance with international museological theories, the EU stresses primarily the cultural and social impact of museums and demands the local, regional, national museums to become social agencies that support the development of shared values and identities and cultural identities in a multicultural society. The EU regards the cultural diversity in Europe as a great value, and therefore they urgently ask museums for their active contribution to foster this difficult integration of a multinational and multicultural. This means, in the eyes of the European Union strategies, for example, to get the so-called non-visitors by lowering the cultural thresholds by means of an activating presentation of the objects. You all know what it is, hands-on, minds-on, and scenographic ideas. Further, museum education, visitors' participation, and last but not least, and this may be difficult, they ask for a role modification in the relation between museum experts and various social groups. And this, of course, includes also interaction by social media. Here I have to point out that all these social engineering elements in the EU strategies are integral parts of their understanding of Europeanization of cultural heritage in Europe. The EMEE Project has taken these impulses up and developed several toolkits for museums that are evaluated during the Eurovision Labs. You see here 5 EMEE toolkits. They are in English, and you can then load down freely. This first I talk later about, but here's integrating a multicultural Europe. This is bridging. This is from our Slovenian partner, then bridging the gap is from our Italian partner, then this synesthetic translations of perspectives is from the Atelier Brückner, the scenographic partner, and finally social web and interaction is by Monochrome, the partner from Vienna. If you go to the website, to Outcomes, you find all this and you can easily print it out. But the core year of EMEE Project started with open questions. While the EU recommends the museums to take on an active role within society to strengthen shared values and tolerant identities, then the question nevertheless remains unanswered: which concept of European identity could be suitable and viable for all those local, regional and national history museums in Europe which do not, and I think this was the question before, explicitly engage with typical European topics like European history, transnational phenomena all over Europe, or a very multicultural audience. We, the EMEE coordinator, decided to answer this question with our concept of changing perspective that offers multi-layered meanings, or as our slogan says, many visions of one and the same object. This concept is not based on a general museological theory, but on a concept that is used in the theory in my discipline of mediation of history in the education and in the public sphere. We are specialized in the areas of historical culture, historical consciousness and historical identity, and therefore discuss the topic of European identity since several years. And briefly, our position in the debate about European identity and Europeanization of cultural heritage is far away from considering European identity as a closed concept that could replace the existing local, regional and national historical and present-day identities by a top-down procedure. The same is true for the idea to create a new European master narrative in history. Instead, in EMEE strongly asks for a position which acknowledges the diversity of historical experiences and perspectives in Europe and the complexity of local, regional, national and European identity references everybody has to live with in this daily life. The Europeness, the Europeness of European identity in the EMEE concept is understood mainly as willingness and ability to acknowledge the diversity, to deal with it in a way that is aligned with the principles of mutual understanding and interest, rationality and tolerance within the framework of plurality, democracy and human rights. The starting point of EMEE is that the people in Europe firstly have to become familiar with all the different national and ethnic experiences and perspectives within the European society, and that they firstly have to build up a European mental map in her mind when they think about their own matters. And finally, they have to learn to cope with this diversity and especially with this complexity. In one word, the Europeanization of cultural heritage in EMEE means to strengthen the change of perspective and to link up the national perspectives with other points of view and a European mental map. It is essential to realize that one and the same historical experience in Europe, if you look around, has a different interpretation nearly in every country you find in Europe. And instead of promoting a preset and fixed European interpretation of history or identity, it is necessary to foster the ability to engage in a dialogue which is based on the notion that interpretations of history are always done from a particular perspective and without which the ability to adopt the principle of multi-perspectivity is bound to fail. And this principle of multi-perspectivity is the key concept of my discipline, and we regard it as essential for any discourse of Europeanization and European identity. The EMEE Project, and this is now the guiding idea again, tries to apply this principle of multi-perspectivity to history museums. On the one hand, this means our museological notion is that an object's meaning does not or not exclusively emerge from the object alone, but is rather ascribed. This is a discussion we at least had in Germany. In this context, it is the context and the point of view that construct the meaning of the cultural heritage and the museum object and transport the message, not the isolated object and not the individual historical event. With regard to implementing this principle of multi-perspectivity to the work of museums in a practical context, we have developed the concept of change of perspective, which enables the museums, or we hope that it enables the museums, to function as a school of perception for the visitors and for the audience. School of perception means that they get impulses, ideas, and motivation to look at the cultural heritage from different perspectives. This concept comprises three different strands of our concept of Europeanization, which are nevertheless connected. The first strand is the reinterpretation of objects of the cultural heritage in order to open the construction of meaning to a variety of points of views relevant to European societies, and in order to attract visitors with different interests, cultural backgrounds, ages, and attitudes. Instead of presenting objects in a one-dimensional way within one established line of interpretation, it is aimed to stimulate the audience to construct multi-layered meanings, to discuss it, and starting from their own point of view and changing their own uses of interpretation. The second direction is to attract and involve visitors from different social strata and groups more actively, because the museums, if they want to have a variety of meanings for their objects, they need the interpretations of many social groups, what they can relate to these objects, what their interpretation and their approach is. And the third idea is, and here is the international cooperation in order to gain further insights into new, especially trans-regional, European and global issues, topics, methods, and means of representation. These three strands are mutually dependent, as I said. On the one hand, it is necessary to involve the different perspectives of different social groups. This does not mean only cultural or ethnic groups, also from educational background, cultural background, and age, and so on, from outside to the museum, as well as European cooperations in order to create new approaches to the familiar objects. On the other hand, in order to attract new groups of visitors, it seems to be necessary to offer attractive layers of meaning for them. Let me now address the last item on my agenda. The EMEE cooperation has shown, and this is the experience of 3.5 years, that the most challenging task for all partners involved was not the reinterpretation of objects from multiple perspectives and their connection to concepts that aim to attract new visitor groups. Rather, the most challenging task, as I saw it, was to avoid losing sight of the European perspective. And also in the title of this conference, you have one object, many vision, but your vision was lost, maybe. To tackle this challenge, we have developed the EMEE Toolkit number 1 you have submitted on the display, which is designed to support museums to discover even their new aspects of their object where they seem to be in a very homogeneous cultural field. And the title of this toolkit, number 1, that is dedicated to the objects, is Making Europe Visible by the Interpretation, and I like to explain this firstly as an abstract idea and then illuminated by an example. Within the context of this project, our preliminary studies have shown 8 approaches to be particularly helpful with identifying the transnational European potentials in familiar museum objects, even though they naturally do not apply to all objects without exception. In any case, however, it turned out that they are very useful also to find out European dimensions in objects that on the first glance did not have any. The first approach is to understand the object as a migrant. This sometimes requires some provenance research. By taking a closer look at an object, it often becomes apparent that in their own history, objects indeed show transregional or transcultural European and sometimes even global references, when, for instance, they were produced elsewhere and subsequently sold and resold once or twice before they ended up in their particular position in the respective museum. The second approach, the example comes later. The second approach asks for the background circumstances of the object's origin or production process. By taking a closer look at the production of an object, sometimes interesting transregional European or global dimensions can be discovered beyond the provenance. For example, an object may be manufactured locally, but by hands of a foreign craftsman or an artist who was not closely linked to the region on site. And even if the producer was closely linked to the region, he can nevertheless have included various influences gained by study trips, trade fair visits, letters, books, and also colleagues from other regions, so that he combined the local with trans-regional influences. The third approach asks for cultural transfer by means of transregional networks. Transregional networks can be relevant on various levels. Many things that commonly seem to be local traditions exhibit traces of transregional or cross-cultural European exchange processes when taking a closer look, thereby external influences, often from long distances, were included. Some of these influences were so deeply adapted by the regional culture that in the end, the cultural products were understood as local traditions. The fourth approach asks for encompassing cultural contexts. The transregional European or even global dimension of a certain group of museum objects may be made visible by discovery or make visible that the object was a part of a large encompassing context with regard to style, history of ideas or cultural practices. There are many museum objects that can be considered as a local representative of a supranational European development. This may be clear for the educated visitors, of course, but if we want to be attractive for visitors that have not this background, and it's not the same all over Europe, then this visibility of these European-wide backgrounds should be useful. While these 4 approaches can be applied to any object, the next 4 approaches address special cases, but they are also important, what our research showed us. The fifth approach addresses objects that deal in an explicit way with cultural encounters within or beyond Europe. Transnational perspectives can easily be gained from objects with iconic or written statements that explicitly deal with topics such as cultural encounter, migration, or missionary or diplomatic activities but also of armed conflicts. This kind of objects can be very useful to stress the global or global dimension of other objects that are not so illustrative when they are combined with them as secondary objects. A further approach looks for objects depicting the perception of the self and the other, and this approach is especially suited for the multi-perspective presentation because they explicitly present a point of perspective. And not only do those imagination of the self and the other provide an impression of the concept of ideas which existed at a certain time about foreign regions or cultures and the rest of the world. At the same time, such objects can reveal the self-image of the producers as the mental basis for the construction of the foreign culture. Especially interesting to combine are also objects which reflect the view of the others from outside or the foreign on our own culture. The seventh approach looks for the quality of an object as an icon. It's not very, you will not find so many objects of this, but I want to mention it to have the whole framework. It can be informative to examine whether the museum possesses objects which are perceived as typical for their own or foreign culture and also for Europe. Here, the questions are illuminating why these objects and in which time are perceived as typical, or how the status of the typical has emerged, maybe by marketing, identity policies, tourism, and so on. Since this is the ICOM conference, I like to mention an ICOM volume of 2010 in which different European museum directors presented objects from their collection they understood as typically European, and for many people it's very surprising to look in this volume. And now the last approach is also not so many objects. Sometimes it's worthwhile to examine whether there are objects which are not per se as an object, but by means of a connected narration suitable to talk about European connections. For example, I want to give an example. If you have an exhibition about migration and you take a certain suitcase only to symbolize, this is one. But sometimes you have a certain suitcase which is really related to a certain family or a certain person, and these are such objects that in itself do not tell much a suitcase, but it's a narrative combined to that. Now I like to illustrate this abstract explanation with an object that is to be found in the Maximilian Museum and where it gets not much attention. It is presented among 20 other items in a vitrine and in a way that makes clear this is not a highlight of the collection and nobody looks at this. But we chose this object in order to see what we can do with our framework, because such objects like chinoiserie is found in many smaller or medium local or regional museums. It was always the idea with our examples to use objects that can be found in many places. But the interpretation of this object along the change of perspective scheme made clear that it has really an interesting potential to become the central piece of a presentation, in our case, as an object of the month, and the whole series was titled as Europe in Our Museum. And many people came to look to this reinterpretation and to discuss about it. So I want to go here. This object, to explain it shortly, is Maestro porcelain, produced very shortly after the invention of European porcelain production. It's decorated in Augsburg because in Meissen they did not know how to decorate the porcelain, and we had enamel craftsmen and they made the decoration. Then we don't know anything about the project, and it came back to Augsburg in 1927. And the picture shows a tea ceremony, a typical Chinese tea ceremony, and you see, this pattern here, you see this is a real Augsburg pattern. This means the Augsburg craftsmen were so so proud that they put into this Chinese style their own local pattern. So, what did we do? We went on to approach one, and this was not very difficult in this case. This object only went from Meissen to Augsburg and then elsewhere, but it shows on a second level the whole situation that Europe at this time, early modern times, tried to copy Chinese production of porcelain, and they admired very much. We today in Europe are not used to admire other civilizations or cultures so much as higher in their cultural standing, and this is behind that. And you see here a plate. This was made before the Germans had the porcelain technique. In the former time, they had to send pictures to China and to ask them to paint it on command. And this is the emblem of the Bavarian ruling dynasty, the Wittelsbacher, who also wanted to have in 1600 a Chinese painted porcelain plate with their own family emblem. Then the next approach is transregional context of production. I just have given it to you. We realized it by a map that showed all the connections, but most important for us was to show that Europe 300 years ago really was keen to get the cultural products of China, and we made it in contrast to the idea that China is now the producer of copies of the brands of Europe. And the third approach about the networks, the patterns of the decoration came to Europe on three ways. The first one was that they had some original objects, and then they produced pattern books. And you see here one, it's made by an Augsburg artist, and they gave ideas how Chinese decoration has to be. It's in 1733, and the other one is that they reconstructed it from travel books. And all of these ideas came to this, and we have a Chinese student community in Oxford University. We went with them to look at this art, and they all said, it's fake, it's fake, it's fake. They really realized in the first moment what is the difference between the European interpretation of Chinese art and the real Chinese art. It's a Euro-Chinese word. Then the encompassing transregional context, of course, you know that it was a European-wide style in noble and bourgeois houses with tapestry and so on. The next point, the next 4 points, and this was also that I chose this example, is that we have to see that they are not relevant for this object. And this is our experience that even if 3 or 4 of the approaches are viable, then you can create interesting stories to the object. A cultural encounters as the theme of the object were not relevant because only Chinese can be seen in the tea ceremony. But you have here in Lisbon, in the Museu of Oriental History, you have this number screen with the arrival of Portuguese sailors with their black slaves in Japan, and you see the European Jesuits and Japanese. Also, the next approach, perception of self and others, is not so much in this tea ceremony, but of course, as I told you before, you can make it very clear that it's a Europeanized version of Chinese culture, adapted to European taste and understanding. If you put as comparison a real original Chinese bowl and tea instrument, and you see then very good the stereotyping of Chinese culture. Important is for the Chinese in the early modern time, and this we worked out, is that this culture was seen as exotic, but not as minor, not as uncivilized. And the African cultures and also the Latin American cultures, they were seen as uncivilized, and the symbols often have no clothes, they are naked. China was on the same page. And the last is also not relevant in our case, but I give you an example what an object like an icon is, and I think you have in your museum also icons. In our case in Germany, for example, the Gutenberg Bible. This is an object which everybody identifies with European history and culture, even if you don't go into the depths of the history. And the last one of object narration, I gave you the example of the suitcase. There's another one. In our National Museum, you see this motorbike, and this is the motorbike given as a welcome present to the 1 millionth migrant worker arriving in the 60s in Germany. And here you see the motorbike, here you see the photo from this situation, and this motorbike as an object is not worth to have a place in a museum. But with this narrative, it can be part of German history. And we have made a lot of exemplary models using these 8 approaches, but also the ideas of social, bridging the gap, social participation, all the ideas of EMEE we put together in 23 exemplary new models on different museum objects from Neolithic but also from others. And you find it in this Toolkit 6. It's on the website and it will be printed, but we have online further 10 of them are in this volume and 13 of them are on the website only. And only to give you an insight, this is from our Portuguese partner, the Belgica Affair on Object Valuations. You find an abstract and it's about 10-15 pages. Here they describe it, here a secondary object, and then we also have about social participation, role change, and so on, and also a scenographic idea, a scenographic concept, how this object could be presented in a museum. But this all is, of course, based on the ideas of the partners which have developed the content of the object. And to come finally to my last remark, the EMEE's Eurovision of the challenge of the Europeanization of cultural heritage and museums is no European master narrative and no top-down prescribed identity, but an attitude of openness toward a multi-perspective framework by change of perspective in the field of the reinterpretation of objects and by integrating the multitude of perspectives of different social groups in and dealing with the cultural heritage. And my last sentence is, behind all these ideas is the single idea that the complexity is growing with the European integration and the globalization. And I think if in 50 years or 100 years someone looks back to the museums at the beginning of the 21st century, he has to see that the museums tried to find answers to this highly increasing complexity of every meaning, of identity, of heritage, and of sense in life. And this is our contribution to this way. Thank you.
Jorge will talk with us education for global citizenship and museum collection.
And thank you, Susan, for such a brilliant project. I find many similarities between our work, although we are very comprehensive and has multi-layers of universities involved, and you can see by the quality of the results. Nonetheless, I think our approach answers more or less the last challenge, which is how museums are coping with this complex world in the 21st century. So I'm going to talk about global citizenship education and museum collections. I'm going to present very briefly one of the projects I've been involved with. It's called Museu, which means World Museums, and it involves a partnership of people that don't usually work together. I'm talking about museums and NGOs for development. We've developed a very close partnership between NGOs from Germany, Portugal, Hungary, and the Czech Republic, working side by side with Czech, Hungarian, Portuguese, and German museums. The museum in Portugal is chosen as a museum where I work, in Loures. It's a local authority museum. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've done. But before that, I wanted to give you some overview of what global citizenship means, because many of you here seem are not from the NGO world. I'm not from the NGO world myself. And it was a new kind of terminology that as museum professionals, if you're going to cooperate with new people to do something different, we can't expect to work with the same people and face different results. If you want different results, you need to change the ingredients of the cake. And this cake has NGOs for development working with us. And one of the things I was not familiar with was what the heck means global citizenship education, and what the heck does that have to do with museums? What are museums responsible for so many things, and now plus global education? How can this be done? So there was many questions popping in our minds when we were developing this work. There was a little bit of suspicious, in a way, how NGOs enter museums and enter the permanent collections, and we didn't have a lot of money, to be honest. So starting from maybe the first question is, do museums have a responsibility towards social issues? Of course they do. And if they believe so, and if they have, in the core of the mission, something they want to do to help society become a better place, and as Susan has very well said, and Hans as well before us, if you want to have a proper attitude to the world we're living in today, maybe you should do something about it. I'm not saying that everything we've been doing here is perfect. It has some faults. I know myself it has some faults in the project, but we've tried our best. And working with different organizations is not always easy. Some of the museums we work with are the National History Museum in Nuremberg, in Germany, the Railway Museum in Budapest, and also the City Museum of Budapest, and the Municipal Museum of Ústí in Czech Republic, and the National Museum of Agriculture, also in Czech Republic, plus the Loures Municipal Museum. So we've talked a little bit about what global citizenship means and what does it mean to have this positive attitude, using museums as tools for global citizenship education. We, between the year 2000 and the year 2015, the UNESCO and the UN has issued the Millennium Development Goals. It's called as MDGs. And now between 2016 and 2030, we are under the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. The first ones, and for me as a museum person, this shocked me a little bit. The first one was not produced or thought to be used in the developing world. It was thought to be used in the developing countries. And now the agenda has changed. And for the SDGs to 2030, it's the whole world together, not just the developing countries, but also the European Occidental countries, where also Portugal makes part. So what I'm saying now is that we have some responsibilities on this new agenda till 2030, so museums can do something. And we've developed, I'm going to talk about the Portuguese case with more detail, then I'm going to the website and presenting it all to you. We've developed 10 tools. 8 of them are on Millennium Development Goals, and the last 2 are on the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. One has to do with water, and another one has to do with food. And what we've done with food, but I think it's really remarkable. In our museum, which is a convent from the 17th century, from the Harriers, kind of Franciscan order, very strict. They usually eat what they produce. And in the museum where we are, we have many places that sometimes are used as warehouses, visitors are not allowed to go inside, it's just a shut door. And we had a beautiful, beautiful dovecote, with pigeonry. And it was all, what the dovecote is? Pombal. Okay. So, in this pigeonry, it was beautiful to see from the outside. It is in the grove where olive trees are grown. And it could never go inside. People were a little bit, making stories in the tunnel going somewhere to the church or something. So what we've done, we've cleaned up the dovecote inside, we've painted it up, and this project offered us the opportunity to do that. And in the places where the doves used to make their nests, we've put eatable insects. And that's one of the ways the UN says we need to solve the food shortages in the future to 2030 is how as we as humans going to eat the insects. So we stand up the insect supermarket in the dovecote, which is something quite unusual for our local museums ourselves. So you can go inside and you can really eat some cockroaches, dry of course, and some of the other things if you're brave enough. I've tried them all, but they're not so bad. They taste a bit like with sugar. So it's good for the wine. For each of the tools, we have like a flyer, and on the other side, as you can see 12, we have like a poster. Because many of these things we produce, we think people just put them in their pockets when they get home and just put it in the bin. And the poster is the way maybe you can keep it. Now I'm going to be more clear. Maybe I am. So where do we stand from the tendencies or from the philosophical point of view? We've talked about this, and we've heard with Hans and also with Susan. Again, I have to thank you for both for your presentation. It helped me a lot to understand the concept and putting my feet right now as well. That we are passing from this hard power museum, museum, more liquid, more multivocal, more concerned with the louder. Yes, sure, thank you. Maybe it's because I'm deviating my face from the microphone as well. Thank you for your remark. I think museum now is more like an intellectual interpreter than a normative legislator that tells the truth, and the truth the museum speaks out is the only truth, and that's it. I think these museums are more participatory, and this was a very participatory experience, putting NGOs deciding what they're going to put in our discourse. It reflects, the politics and the differences of acting with people that are not in the museum field. So in a way, this is like a more liquid, more soft power, if I want to put it, more post-colonial. And I also see this idea of Susan that sees museums as contact zones. I think these 8 approaches you developed are kind of contact zones approaches as well, and we've done something quite similar as well. So we we need to learn new things, testing new approaches, and establishing new types of partnerships. And this was not a very obvious partnership, museums working with NGOs for development. And we didn't have a lot of interest. We didn't want to go into the museum and say, everything you've done inside is rubbish, and you need to change everything. That's not our approach. What we've done, we've seen the museums, we've selected and discussed from the permanent collections a few items that we could work that were more suitable to this approach. And from this reflection, we've selected a few objects or a few parts of the exhibition that help to create this space for innovation and experimentation. Again, our idea here is that the museum visitor, when he's going inside the exhibition, they're not really going to learn from global education. They're going to learn something about an object to a perspective that was not supposed to be there the first time. This is the idea of the museum as a transformative role. Heritage sites have a transformative role, and museums have this potential through their collections. So I'm going to now just skip here to show you the website. So, here. Yes. Hello? Where is it? I'm going to open it. Sorry. So this is the website, museummundial.org, and it's in the 4 languages. I'm going to do the English version, although none of the partners are British, but that's the language we all talk in the world nowadays, and it's a way to have more visibility for our project. And I'm going to, sorry, it's not easy, to show you what we have done. For instance, on the global textile industry, which is an example from the Nuremberg Museum in Germany. They had a collection of textiles. You can see from our left side of the picture. It's not very good because of the case glass. And it shows textiles from different parts of the world, not from Europe. So what we've done a kind of a wardrobe where you have like t-shirts hanging on and an image of jeans. And the idea is that when you buy a pair of jeans, you're not going to the museum to see jeans, okay? You're going to the museum to see world culture. This is a world culture museum, and you're seeing textiles from different parts of the globe. The idea is, how can you reflect on your individual consumption of jeans nowadays, which are a global product. Cotton comes from Egypt, sometimes it is transformed in India or in Pakistan, sometimes it uses children as labor. You want to know this when you buy your trousers? Should the museum do something about it? Make you reflect about it. That was our approach in a way, in this case. And what we've done, we've made this question, who sews your clothes? Who are the people responsible for making that object tangible and in a way connecting to more sustainable ways of life in the collection that is displayed in the museum. So we put here some of the details that we wanted to do in our story. Some pictures as well. You can see this is kind of a hands-on exhibition. Again, this project gave us the opportunity to enter a permanent collection as this one and to refresh it with new eyes. The collection is going to be there for about 30 years, but you have a new perspective of the things already there. We've also put some of the things we've learned about budget, and they are very cheap, all these tools, around 2,000, 3,000 euros. How we did it step-by-step approach, choosing the object, the topic, all the discussions, choose the right people to do the wardrobe, choose the right designer, how are you going to discuss all of these different layers that you're going to present, and make yourself time to make errors, learn from them, and then rephrase your indulge yourself time to make correction moves. Because if you don't do it, your work is going to be, not so good. It's kind of an experiment. You're trying a new cake, or you're trying the same cake with new ingredients, and sometimes it does not go as they expected. We also thought about evaluation, how we can evaluate each of the tools, the ups and downs, the lessons learned, feedback from visitors, and some other things. We've done 10 tools for each country, and this website shows the 40 tools altogether, and they're already in English and Portuguese, and they are available to download if you want. We've left outside some of these leaflets on our project in English. We also have some in Portuguese, but if you want to come talk to us later. This is the partners that I involved with: FINEP, the Hungarian Railroad, the Natural History Museum in Nuremberg, and different NGOs and a university here in Portugal as well. This was our approach. Let me just see another one. For instance, about sustainable development and the Siemens spectrum. So this is at the Railway Museum in Budapest, and they've developed I wanted a nicer picture, but I don't have it, so I'm going to change to a new one. Sorry. Okay, this is really nice, as far as I'm concerned, of course. So this was an approach from the Czech team, and they developed this idea of this from the sea, which is, nowadays there are several islands of plastic looping around in the oceans of our globe. And what they've done, they've commissioned an artist that deals with plastic that comes to shores in Cape Islands. And they've made these objects, which is entirely made of plastic from the sea, that they kind of look like coral. And they've put it in the museum in these beginning of 20th century cases, comparing with natural coral. And then they make these questions on how can people reflect on the garbage straight to the sea. These are the cases. It looks like a very truthworthy coral, but it's just plastic transformed in an artistic way. And the idea is to a little bit to disrupt people and to make them, think again on their habits and the things they are doing. This is the Zero Hunger, the insect supermarket that I was talking about on the Dove Coat. Some of these niches are the places where the pigeons used to nest, and now you can have insects from there. This is the Dove Coat, one of the images, and this is some larvae that you can eat, that you can taste. So you can go all the way to the grove and just try some insects. Who's brave enough to do it? We still have plenty of them for that. This is again about land grabbing. Land grabbing is a very serious problem in the developing world. Many countries in the developing world, the people are not, they don't have a paper saying I own this piece of land, the native people, and sometimes European or American companies go there. Paper saying this is our land now, we need to be kicked out. So, does the museum have anything to do with these questions? Shall we do something about it? And again, it was the Nuremberg Museum that they did this audio installation on a piece of land where a highway is passing on this particular village in the south of Sahara Desert in Africa. And they've made a multivocal issue. They interviewed some of the people where the highway passed, and they also interviewed some of the German people where a new facility was built and also need to be kicked out of their houses. So it's not again, this idea that they are not less than us, we are more or less on the same level, we face the same issues, and should museums do something about it? In a way, this project is very political. Aren't museums political? Aren't they supposed to be political, to make people reflect? Aren't we the ones trying to use museums to educate people and make schools more aware, make citizens more aware of the problems we are living in? Or we are just for the beautiful and the pretty and the smiles and the cocktails? Which is also good. I'm just saying maybe we should do something. And again, this is an experience that you want to pass. This is not the core business of the museums. Museums are very conservative places, as we all know. And even the board of directors where we are, they look at this project a little bit downwards, saying, well, this is just an experience. You can play as much as you want for 3 years, and then it's done. It's not going to be, the core business of the museum. But some of these things will stay. This is another example from the Czech team, I guess, if I'm not saying that. I'm not Czech team, yes. I have a colleague from the NGO for Development here with me. And they are talking about instruments around food and how can we talk about these instruments around food and the traditional cooking tools and dishes and pots and all of that, and how is this connected to this multi-layer of different influences from Roman and from other parts that are not originally from the Czech Republic nowadays. And how can we use these to talk about energy while you're producing food, energy while you're cooking meals, both in the developing world and in the developing countries. So this was more or less our approach. I'm not going to tie you more with the project. All the 40 tools are in English. They're all available on the website. Please be free to take a look at them. And now I'm going to, again, what we did. We wanted to create an expanded discourse around the permanent exhibition of the different museums that are partners of the project, to raise awareness for the problems of today's world, starting from the museum collection as an excuse to start a discussion and to offer a new vision about education for global citizenship as a leitmotif from museum collections. And now I'm going to I have another more 3 slides, so I'm getting to the end, sorry. Not 3, just 2. Which is another project we are involved in at our municipality, which is a network with 6 different municipalities. Also, like a sign of this previous progress, if I can say this. And this network, it has these different municipalities: Loures, Mafra, Susanne, and and we are together with this Rota Histórica das Linhas de Stokes, which is a historical route on the line of Torres Vedras, which prevented Napoleon's 3rd invasion of Portugal. And our idea here is, again, to work more with schools. We involve 6 municipalities, 120 teachers, 6 interpretation centers, 12 classes, do segundo e terceiro ciclo, so 3rd, 6th grade and 8th grade, on using these military works, archaeological military works, as an excuse to talk about global citizenship again. One of the things we are going to do is, for instance, talk about the refugees in Portugal during 1810 and the refugees in the world nowadays, or the way children and women were used to build the archaeological forts and to maintain them afterwards, and child labor nowadays. So we wanted to make this, connection. And we don't want to do this only for history classes, because those are the ones that traditionally come to museums, but you want to do this also with teachers from chemistry, physics, maths, and all the others. And I thank you for your attention. If you have some questions.
Thank you, Joaquim. We have already one question, please.
First, I want to congratulate both lectures and both projects presented. I will not introduce myself because I introduced myself before. I don't know if you have a microphone. Do you hear me?
Yeah, but it's going down.
Yeah, don't need. I'm sorry. Again, me. I was saying that I congratulate both of you for your wonderful projects, but to me, what concerns me the most is the project of Susanne, and what concerns the targets that the EMEE Project wants to achieve by this urbanization of culture. And my question is, taking the construction of the Portuguese seaboard empire in the 15th century, according to Charles Boxer's opinion, that I take the risk to subscribe and agree. Much better than we know, all the production of art that was made in those colonial contexts, and that the result that still is happening now, that we can observe by the example that you gave us, the chinoiserie represented in the porcelain. We had it from the 15th to the 21st century, always consequently. And I give an example, a small example. In the Portuguese ivory pieces and objects of Goa that we can observe in the Rio de Janeiro Museum, in the United States, in South America, in Budapest museums, by the black market that was established after the abandon, the liberation of the colony in 1961. So how can we describe this Europeanization of objects, in this Europeanization of culture that EMEE is constructing? We detach them or we mingle and link them? In this project that you've shown us, this EMEE project, how can we consider and describe the Europeanization culture project in a world cultural construction, because we cannot deny these facts and these reproductions and productions that occur from the 15th century onwards until now. So is it or is it not considered this linked urbanization concept of museum and culture with these facts?
It's easy for me to answer this question because in EMEE, the European history is not only what has happened in Europe, in this territory, because a really most important part in this time you talk about happened outside of Europe, and Europe developed with the reactions to this. And so I use this chinoiserie because it's so, nobody looks at this in the museum. We liked it. But of course it's very important with many things, and like Joaquim also told us you can do it with tissues, also with the colors, where do they come from? And I think it was not excluded. And if you look on our website, you will see that a lot of objects are of course including this global dimension of European history.
Thank you so much.
One more question? No? No question? Yes? Yes? No? Sorry. Okay, thank you both.
Yes, but maybe I may ask a question. How history museums are reacting to this educational program? Because my experience is that many kinds of museums, except the natural history museum, the ethnological, but the history museums, they always have the feeling that they want to be the ultima ratio, you know? They don't want to be a field for learning experiences in other directions. But it's only a question.
Well, the only history museum in that sense that you put is the City Museum of Budapest, which is the most conservative of them all. And it was not easy for the team to set the different and approaches in the museum. It was highly discussed. It was kind of a fight, if I can say that. And also, not only with the curators of history, but also with the educational curators as well. Because they already have, how can I say this, a set, an itinerary in the museum, and a set to already in place. And this changes a lot of things that museum people are used to when then you need to rephrase your itinerary, you need to think about the way you're going to present. You need to think if you're going to, this is a museum that is visited for many tourists. This is going to be done for the tourists or only for the local coming to the schools. This was also another layer of problems that this project helped us reflect upon. And I still don't know how they managed to do it, although the information is both in Magyar and in English. But I don't think tourists see it as a, how can I say, as a very serious approach, because it's a very hands-on thing. They might spend more time there if they have kids or something, but I don't really know how deep it goes. We are still doing the assessment. Maybe when we can tell you more.
I'm curious to hear.
Thank you, Susanne and Joaquim, for this second session. It was with a lot of questions, and I think it's very important for us to reflect and to discuss later more of these questions. And we will start in the afternoon at 2:15. Yes, Mr. President? Okay, have a nice one.